Okay, good morning again from Pipers'Persuasion, Alan Hamilton here from Scotland, and to get up early out my bed at 8:30 or something this morning to speak to Sam Young. Now, Sam Young's in New South Wales. I was nearly going to kid you all on and say that the 101st edition, where I spoke to Cristiano Bicudo in Sao Paulo in Brazil. I was over visiting him, I was going to tell you, and just flew over to see Sam Young from Sao Paulo. And they tell me it's 30,743 kilometres from Cristiano's place to Sam's place. And it's 17 and a half hours in the plane. So how's that for a wee bit of stats for you? So the other half of the world, Sam from Brazil, and I see the quickest place to get to Australia from Brazil is across the Pacific. So you tell me, I understand that you're at 8:30 p.m. or something like that in Australia just now. So you've had the whole day to think about this, and I've just got out of my bed, so we'll need to work on this, Okay, enough of me, folks. This is Samuel Bruce Young, otherwise known as Sam Young, well-known piper, judge, and everything else from Australia, and we're going to discover what the everything else is in the next wee while. So, enough of me. Sit back and enjoy Sam Young, who's going to open up and tell us all about himself, where he's born and all the rest, and what you worked at before you retired, and then you can move on to your early piping life. How's that sound, Sam? On you go.
That sounds great, Alan. Yeah, Alan. Well, I was originally born in Brisbane, in Queensland, Australia. And of course, as a very, very young infant, we moved back to the home town, which is in North Queensland. There were sugar growing towns and in North Queensland. And of course, that's where my father and my parents were located. My father eventually had a business there. He was a pharmacist, but also a piper. So, that was really the early days. And of course, in North Queensland, it was quite remote in many respects, but it also had quite a strong Scottish fraternity, a lot of Caledonian societies. And of course, it had a lot of transient good pipers that came from time to time that visited and worked within the area. So the journey sort of started there, I guess, from a piping perspective. Yeah. So I was taught originally pipes, of course, by my father. I did my education in North Queensland. And of course, when I finished school, I did a fitting and turning apprenticeship. In other words, I was a machinist by trade. And then, of course, eventually that evolved into an engineering career where I did further studies throughout the 70s. My father originally taught me the pipes at around about the age of 8 years of age. I started. And of course, he's had an interesting background because he was taught by a piper who was the name of John A. Clark, or Jock Clark as we knew him. Jock Clark was a pupil of James Centre. And prior to 1907, when Jock immigrated to Australia, Jock, being a pupil of James Centre, also was a pupil for some of the Pibroch work from MacDougall Gillis. Now, MacDougall Gillis, of course, was also James Centre's tutor as well. So there was a bit of a history there. And of course, the story goes that John Clark paid 5 guineas to learn a Pibroch, and he learned 32 Pibroch. from Dougal Guinness. So you think back in those days, 5 guineas was a lot of money to get a P-rock. Yeah, but he was.
Especially if it was a short one, eh?
Aye, that's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, but of course he was an Aberdonian himself. But the interesting part about Jock Clark was he played in the Govan Police for a couple of years. Now that would probably be of interest to you, Alan, because your connection with the Strathclyde Police. But in 1907, so I don't know exactly what years he would have played in the Govan Police, but it would have been probably, in those very early 1900 period, whatever. So he migrated to Australia in 1907 and subsequently was the sponsor the centres, which was John Centre, James Centre, the son, and the other son, Joe Centre, to Melbourne. So he was the man responsible to bring the centres to Australia. So that's just a little bit of background to the whole thing. And
of course, the centres that I knew of, they made bagpipes.
Correct. That's right. And they were the bagpipe makers. And there was the John Centre bagpipe, which was made in Scotland, of course. And then, of course, when they came to Australia, James Centre really took on the whole business. But of course, you've got to remember, it was still a fairly short-lived time, because John Centre died in 1914, and then James Centre died in 1919 with the Spanish flu. So, it was only a relatively short period of, 10 or 15 years of the centres really being in Australia. And of course, there's relatives in Melbourne of the granddaughter, I believe, and they've set up the Centre Institution, and they've got some sort of a museum there, and they're very interested in the history. So that goes on from there. So that was the history there. So that was the I suppose the authenticity behind my father's teaching, and it went on from there. So John Clark then, of course, moved to Queensland. He became a member of the Queensland Police Force. The old joke was that there was no snakes in Ireland because they all came and joined the Queensland Police Force. But in Scotland, I should say, but that was an old joke that was always just kicked around with the Scottish and the Irish when they joined the police force. But and of course, my father then, in the very late 40s, actually, connected with Jock Clark, because Jock Clark moved to a little place called Bowen, which was in North Queensland, and my father was taking up pipes at around about the age of 17 or 18, and he got connected with Jock Clark, and basically that's where he really received his major tuition, early tuition. What can I tell you about that? I know that Jock Clark was like all the old traditional players, was a very big stickler for technique. They were very hard teachers. They didn't let anything go by as far as technique. So it was always a very big emphasis on him making sure that the technique went with the music. And he was a big man. He was a man that was renowned for playing big tunes, like the Blair Drummer and the Sheaf Wife was one of his very famous sets. And I can tell you, at the age he died in 1960, and I'd just been learning the Pipers'Persuasion for about a year or 18 months. And I do remember to this day Jock Clark playing Blair Drum and the Sheep Wife, and it still sticks in my mind to this day. And it was interesting because he used to play a Strasbourg heel and toe, heel and toe, heel and toe.
Yeah. Did they play up tempo?
And very much up tempo. Yeah, it was. It's really. It was, and he was a young boy. I still remember that to this day. So these things stick with you, of course. But yeah, he was everybody. He'd put the foot and the heel in the socket and just play heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. Yeah, these great big hoofer shoes are about size 13.
Yeah, it's amazing. Aye.
Yeah. But of course, one of his downfalls, sadly, was he liked to drink, and that sort of was a bit tough on the family. But anyhow, so that's where it sort of that early childhood training started, and I guess it was a privilege to think back and think I had that opportunity.
So that was John Clark.
Yeah.
What about, I've got a note here about wee Donald MacLean of Inverness.
Yeah, so that was interesting because my father was a perfect correspondent. He loved to correspond with people around the world, and he had a connection with Robert Lester in England. He was a pipe maker, and that correspondence went on in the late 50s, starting into the 60s, and it was through him that he got a connection to wee Donald MacLean of Inverness, and he started a correspondence. And through that correspondence, that evolved in connection with another gentleman here in Australia who's now dead, and he migrated to Australia, to Hobart, or to Tasmania. And he was here for a couple of years, and he brought the whole family, Margaret and the tiny wee daughter. And I had the opportunity to go down to him, a boy around about 11 years of age, and I'd been learning the practice chanter, and I spent 3 weeks with him and he gave me, and I've still got to this day, he wrote out basically. The Logan's Tutor was effectively what he wrote out, but it was all in beautiful backhand writing. He'd write all the explanatory notes, and he put everything on these 3 1/4 inch tapes, reel-to-reel tapes.
Yeah.
And I've still got those, of course. And of course, it was fantastic tuition. And again, I can only reinforce that he was all about ensuring that the integrity of the technique was absolutely 100%.
It's amazing.
By the way, he only ever played a light thrower D, never played a heavy thrower D. But of course, the interesting part about wee Donald was, and he was only just a wee man, but he was. I always recall he was very, very, very patient and very much about playing good technique. So it was, again, that was that whole thing about technique and impressing upon the importance as a young learner to get the technique right. And of course, I can say to you that I never played a tune in 2 years. I was on technique for 2 years on a practice chanter.
Goodness sake, aye. That was quite common in the 60s, the early 60s, when folk were getting taught. Ian MacLean was about a year on exercises or something like that.
Yes, he's told me the same story, yes. So as time went on, the interesting part about that was, of course, wee Donald was a John Nicol pupil. Right? And of course, what he did subsequently is that I've got the recordings of all these little dozens of them, little 3 1/4 inch reel to reel, of all the old Nicol marches and particularly the marches and the settings. And, it's interesting. I haven't listened to them for quite a number of years, but I can say to you that some of the settings, you wouldn't hear them today.
And can you speak of an example of this?
For example, if you said Jeannie Crothers, you play that with the setting. You never hear that today. In the second time through.
Now, is that an adaptation from the original composition, or was that the original composition? What is it?
I honestly could not comment, but all I can say to you is that Donald was claimed that everything he's put on these tapes he got from John Nicol.
Okay.
Now, so whether these old pipers just change from time to time to suit the occasion, or what, I don't know. But
I suppose if it's your composition, you can adapt it to suit yourself when you feel like it.
Yeah, but I think it'd be dangerous to get up and play it at Inverness these days.
Aye, exactly. Aye. If there's a provenance for it, then that's a half an hour discussion.
Yeah, and we haven't got a half an hour to talk about.
No, exactly.
yeah. So that was really the story with wee Donald, you know, and then of course he then decided that Australia wasn't for him, and he went back to Scotland and
Aye.
relocated. Yeah.
And what about
So,
Torquil MacLeod of Tain?
well, that was an interesting one, yeah, and I can just briefly touch on that. Torquil MacLeod de Tain came about through the Robert Thompson of Leicester as well, through that correspondence. And also, by the way, there was a lot of notes of Willie Gray's that were shared from Robert Thompson of Leicester to my father about reed making and pipes and all this. And my father was quite interested he dabbled a bit in pipe making and making chanters, and he was very interested. And Torquil MacLeod of Tain was the son of Donald MacLeod of Tain, the MacLeods of Ascent. And Donald MacLeod of Tain made about 100 sets of pipes, you know, back probably end of last century, I'd say, end of the 1900s. And yeah, so Torquil, of course, and David, his brother, they never had any sons or daughters. So when it came to the end of the thing, end of their life, basically my father ended up inheriting all the tools of the MacLeod of Tain dynasty, but they're all old tools and, you know, spoon bits and, you know, but the interesting part about it was Torquil was an engineer and he spent many years in South Africa, but in 1923, he made a gold-mounted set of pipes which hang in the museum in Inverness to this day. And they are gold-mounted. They're in the museum in Inverness as a gold set. But he won them as an engineering award. He didn't win them as a pipe maker's award.
And that's amazing, isn't it? Eh?
Yeah.
So, did anybody ever hear him played?
I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is when I subsequently got there in '74, I did actually see Torquil alive in the hospital in Inverness, but he was on his last days, and it was a bit unfortunate. But the other interesting part about it was Donald MacLeod of Tain, his father. He was one of the trailblazers when it came to artificial materials. He made pipes out of erinoid. David MacLeod, the son, had these pipes there, and they were made of erinoid, which erinoid was a milk product. Looks like a bit like a hard artificial ivory, and it's called erinoid. You might have heard of it. I don't know if you've actually heard of it, but anyhow,
is that a plastic or what, Sam?
It looks like an artificial ivory.
And what is it actually?
Sorry?
What kind of material? Can you tell me? Is that a plastic material?
It looks like in this day and age, you'd say it's a white plastic. You know how they make they turn the artificial ivory, just like an artificial ivory that McCallum or any of those people would make. That's just what, but it's made out of a milk product, was spun into thing, and that was made way back in the way back. So he made that. He made chanters out of brass. He did all sorts of things, and an interesting guy. But the interesting part about it was they knew all the tricks as far as the theory behind how to make chanters and the diameters and the tapers and the holes and what effect had this and that. So that was all documented, and it was really interesting. So my father ended up with all of that. And the other interesting part about that, of course, that's what he had a great inquiring mind, my father, and he liked to know everything. So he got right into the theory of it, to the point that he actually published an article in the International Piper. It's referenced there in the International Piper in 1968 on scales and all the theory behind it.
Yes.
He wrote that. Yeah.
Have you still got a copy of that, Sam?
Oh yeah, I can get you a copy of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I could put it on the website just for the viewers to look at. Below the video. I do this from time to time. Furnish papers and photographs as ancillary to the interview, and I think that would be interesting to read that. Yeah.
I think the problem there, Alan, is of course there's probably only about 2% of pipers that really understand it.
Aye, but if you watch our Pipers musicians episode 100, we tackled a lot of difficult questions there, including scales and notations and all the rest of it. And we came to some very good conclusions. So It's
Yeah,
up to folk just to stretch your brain a wee bit and try and understand, you know.
that's right.
Moving
That was
on,
the talk. Yep.
is it too early to talk about your tuition with R.U. Brown and Bob Nicol?
Oh no, not really. But that extended out of the talk, out of the David MacLeod issue. There, David MacLeod was a pharmacist living in Aberdeen. He was a piper of some sort. Those two, Talk and Willie, were both taught by Willie MacLean, actually.
Yeah.
Willie MacLean. But David used to go along to classes to Bob Brown in Aberdeen, and of course this correspondence came up, and my father was really wanting to get into the Pibroch. This is really, really like late 50s. And David said, well, I'll put you in contact with Bob Brown. And of course, my father then corresponded with Bob Brown, and that's where the journey began. And of course, they exchanged tapes for years. Wow. I mean, probably, I would say 10 years at least. Yeah, and I've got all the old tuition, all old personal tutorial recordings, and my father naturally had to send over recordings of himself playing, and he only had a couple of Pibroch himself at the time, and Bob took him on, and he went, every month there'd be an exchange of tapes and tunes and stuff, so that went on until I think the old boy got over there once in about 1968, I think. Once, and then Bob Brown came to Australia in 1970 for his first trip out, where he played recitals, New Zealand, and the whole thing. And I was just a boy. In fact, I was not even 17 that year, because it was a year of the Australian Championships, and that's another story. And we went down to meet Bob, and they did tutorial again and all that sort of thing, and that was great. And then 2 years later, he came back to Australia, came to Hobart, and the arrangement was he was going to do all his duties down in the south, and he was going to come and spend another, I think, 3 weeks up in the North Queensland with my father. Well, unfortunately, that was the sad part about it, is that Bob took a thrombosis in the knee.
Yeah.
And of course, he insisted on going home. He wouldn't be hospitalised. And so he got home, and of course, sadly, he passed with a clot in 3 days later in Bromar at Belmont.
Yeah.
So originally, my father was due to go back to Scotland with Bob some couple of weeks later, but that didn't happen. So my father got on to Mrs. Brown, and she said, "Still come," because he was booked up, "and I'll get you into Bob Nicol." And he went across, and spent another 3 or 4 weeks with Bob Nicol that year in 1972. And that was how the start of my journey with Bob Nicol in 1974.
Yeah, good. And so tell us about that journey. What happened there?
Well, it was amazing. It was fantastic. When I arrived there, the first thing I did was turned up, and he said, "Right." And Bob they always reckon he was a bit gruff, but he was a lovely fellow, and he wasn't really gruff. But but when you, from first impressions, you got he's a bit, well, this could be a bit rough.
Aye.
Because he was an old bachelor, and he said, "Right," he said, "get the practice piano," and he got me to play every piece of technique that you could possibly play on the bagpipe. And in particular, focus on Tulurth movements and Kroon-Lurth movements and a mark movement.
Yeah.
And I'd just play them and go through exactly what he asked, and he'd say, "Yeah, good, right." So anyhow, we got through it after about an hour of doing this, and I thought, I wonder where this is going. Am I either going to get kicked out the door, or I'm going to get something going here? He says, "Right, that's very good." He said, "There's no problem with your fingers." He said, "Now you can put that thing away," he said, "because we won't be using it anymore."
Yes,
No practice piano. And to this day, right, for the whole rest of the 10 months or whatever it was, never played a practice piano.
He just sang everything.
And everything from that day on was singing and on the pipes, singing
Yeah.
and on the pipes. And occasionally he'd play something on the practice chanter himself, occasionally, but there was never any practice chanter for me.
Uh-huh.
It was all about singing. Now, of course, I was very fortunate and a very fortunate young boy at the time. I was only 23 years of age. We'd had a good, close relationship with the Brown family by this time. And of course, when I went there, I ended up with digs in mill timber in Aberdeen with Robert Brown, Brown's daughter, Fairley, and which remained a lifetime friendship until she passed 2 years ago. And funny part about it is she's still up until she died. She keeps every time we'd speak, she'd say, "Well, have you got the King's taxes off yet?" Because the King's taxes was the one she liked to target me on. But anyhow, so I used to go up there on an average about 2 times a week. I'd catch a bus up in the morning. I'd be there by 9 o'clock. Bob would pick me up in his little old van. We'd out there and it'd be straight into the tunes. And basically what it was initially was he'd get a tune and he'd sing it through. And I did tape record the lessons. I had a monster of a tape recorder machine and I taped them. He'd sing them all through. And then what he would then do is he'd ask me to sing the tunes through with him. And he'd make all the salient points and we'd mark the music up accordingly, And then basically what went on from there is that you had to then say, right, we said, well, make sure come back next time, either whatever. But he said, get it up on the pipes. So the bottom line is you started to get the message very quickly that he was really testing you, because if you really wanted another tune, you had to learn that one.
Yes, you didn't get a new one until you learned the current one.
So the first tune was Talakard.
Uh-huh.
So I get back down the road and I'm day and night learning this Talakard. And I didn't go, but I only went back once that first week because it took me that long to learn the tune.
And how did they play it? Did they play it up, that Talakard? Did they play it up?
But the interesting part there was
that was my first Pibroch ever from Ronnie Morris.
Yeah, well, there you go. It was my first Pibroch from Bob Nicol too. So there you go. But there's one really interesting point of that he pointed out to me. He said the old pipers would have played that E like a melody. All right, but they said but John McDonald was more but when you go up to Ian Morrison with Donald McLeod, he went so you wonder where it all.
There's quite a bit of controversy about the length of cadences and all that stuff. The cadence E, But I think it's written as a cadence E, but as you say, a lot of them at that time played the original cadence E as a crotchet sort of thing.
Correct. That's what he said. Yes, and he made that point to me. So it was just an interesting learning. I think I make these points because I think they're really of interest.
Yeah. So how many tunes did you get from him? Did you ever count?
Yeah, I do. I can tell you. I basically ended up playing over the 10th-month period around about 12 or 14 tunes played on the pipes to me. But in the end, I went away with 80 tunes of tuition.
My God.
But you got to remember that what he was doing at the end, he would give you tunes of that were like the 12 tunes, the principal tune. Like he wanted to make sure you could play a Foskel tune. You could definitely play a Brabeck tune. You could definitely play a Tullamark tune.
Yes.
So you had the bases. He gave you the meats of it. And then what he'd do is he didn't give you... And in the end, he was basically singing tunes. So now you must take this tune, and we'd run through it and sing through it. And put it on the tune. And I had the tune. So at least I had the documentation of what he was after and what he needed,
Yeah.
His big theme was always his big theme to me was always get good pointing into your tunes and good fluency and keep your phrases right.
Yes, 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 yes. And
Pointy,
bring out the music guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
he used the word pointing a lot, whereas Bob Brown in the tuition of my father's tapes used the word scansion a lot,
Yes. Yes.
right? And I
Yes.
understand the idea, but they've got to be careful because sometimes you can, with the terminology scansion, people tend to then can look at music very mathematically.
Well, the whole thing is just bring out the music for the listener so the listener can enjoy the whole
Aye.
thing. And the flow's got to be there all the time. Yeah. So, did they pay much attention to the quality of your instrument or anything like that?
Oh, look, it couldn't be minging like, they didn't
No.
want minging, but he did, if there was a wee bit of sharpness on a note or something like that, they didn't give you a hard
No,
time over just.
no, they're more,
They,
more interested in the tune itself rather than yeah, yeah.
yeah, well, he said to me, he said, look, he said, you're here. He said, I know what you got to give you. The other interesting part, he said, he didn't encourage me in that year I was there to go and try and compete.
Yes.
He said, just go and listen. Now it was
Aye,
interesting
aye,
because I was interested in that comment because Mike Cusack had the same issue with John McFadden.
aye.
So they weren't trying to think. See, when I first arrived there, Jim McIntosh was trying to get me to go across to him, and I was loyal to Bob, and I said, no, I'm going to Bob, and I think Jim would have had me competing the next week, even though I only knew one tune. But anyhow, who knows? But we didn't go down that path. But I heard Bob used to quite often get the pipes out and have a tune,
Yes.
And I'll tell you what, even at 74 years of age, he could play a march.
I heard that. He's a very, very good light music player.
Fasto.
Aye, aye.
You think some of these pipers like Angus McCall play fast. They wouldn't keep up. They would, but
Colin McLellan gave me quite a long recording of his father, Captain John McLellan, playing. I think it was 1958 overseas in Germany, an officers' mess, and they played a series of 2/4 marches, Space and Reels, and it was going like a hurricane. You couldn't keep up with it, but at that particular time, they all seemed to play at a hell of a pace.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, of course, I remember John McLellan came out to judge in 1970 in Australia, and he gave recitals, and they were beautiful, beautiful old set of McDougall drones, and beautiful, beautiful.
Aye.
Yeah, that was a great experience way back then. Mm.
So is that a safely covered the solo piping thing? Well, we can't fully cover anything here.
Oh yeah,
It's a chat we're having. So
yeah,
I
sure.
think maybe it's a bit time to move on to pipe bands. What was your first involvement and moving on from there at pipe bands in Australia?
Yeah, well, of course, when I moved to Brisbane, and at that particular time I was just a country boy, so Brisbane was a big city for me.
Yeah.
And of course, when you moved to Brisbane, and there was only one place to really be, and that was to meet up with Sandy Campbell from the Queensland Irish.
Yeah.
And Sandy was very keen to recruit players into his organisation. So I didn't do it straight away, and I know Ian McLean came out in about 1980 with Sandy, but I wasn't there at the time. But it was a couple of years later that I actually joined the band, and that was the introduction really into pipe bands, apart from bits of stuff we'd done in North Queensland with schools and things like that. But and that's where you learned to really understand you had to blow, and that was a McAllister Reed.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the biggest shock to my system in piping I'd ever experienced. And but Sandy was really the person who really put us into bands and made us understand what we had to do. And of course, we went across that band, went to Scotland. It was one of the very early bands that ever got the opportunity to travel, because you got to recall those days there wasn't a lot of money and bands didn't travel from overseas, particularly from Australia.
No.
So
it cost a fortune to travel from there.
So that's where that evolved, and it was through Sandy that we were able to do what we did, and I learned a tremendous lot. Sandy was a great leader from the point of view that he was a good pipe major. He didn't take any fools, and the interesting part about Sandy is that he used to sing the tunes. He'd sing, and he taught. And again, Sandy's emphasis, even though he probably would tell you himself that he wasn't a Willie Ross as far as a player, but he knew execution, and he taught and played a big emphasis on execution. So that same theme of teaching and execution was coming through everywhere I was going in my life.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So the best band I played with was the Queensland Irish. There's no question about it from my personal point of view. And then, of course, as time went on, I moved to Sydney, and then I got involved with the New South Wales Police Band, and that went pretty well for about 3 or 4 years. I brought that band up as the pipe major, and we got it up to the point it was a grade 1 band but then it sort of imploded because of personnel. We had a lot of army people, and they were disappearing and all the rest of it. So it's very, very hard to maintain a band of any standard in Australia because of just the way it is, But that was probably a very interesting journey, because whether it was a band that was as good as the Queensland Irish, I'd be reticent to say I don't think so. But it was still a very good band. But that was through the efforts of meeting Ian or engaging Ian MacLean.
Yes.
Because when I took that band on in about 93, I got onto a guy here, and you might have heard of the McGregor brothers from Renfrew.
Okay.
Now, they were the drum corps that they won the Worlds in Renfrew in about 1948 or something, and then they moved to Australia. The father and the 3 sons moved to Australia. So, and they were in the BBs and all that sort of thing with Ian and all that sort of thing. So there's a bit of history there. And so I got on to Bill, and I said, Bill, I got the police band here. Could you give me, do you think could you talk to Ian MacLean and ask him if I gave him a ring, could I talk to him? And he said, of course. So I got that connection set up, and I rang Ian. He said, hi. And I said, Ian, I want a set of Sinclair Chandas. Can you organise me? And straight off the bat in the phone, he says, hi, no problem. So Ian organised a set of 16 Sinclair chairs, and we did that because we were on the McAllister Reds, and we were on the sheepskin bags, and we were on the cane drone rigs, and we were doing everything the Strathclyde Police ever did. We mimicked it, see?
Yeah, good.
So Ian came out in 1994, and he was out here judging one of the championships, and I grabbed him and I took him to Canberra in the car for a couple of days. And I learned more in 2 days in the car from Ian MacLean about a pipe band and what I ever learned in my whole life.
It's wonderful, Ian.
And then what I did is I then brought him out for a 3-week stint in 1996, and he worked with us. And that's where it really all came together for me, and I learned so much from Ian.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from Sandy too, and all those experiences. But we did get some results. It's just that it was unsustainable.
Yeah. Did you ever bring a band across to Scotland?
And I guest played with a grade 3 band here in Scotland. Yeah, a couple of times. The Canberra lads. There was a guy by the name of Michael Chalmers who spent some time in Shots in the early 90s. And he was also a member of the Queensland Irish Band back in the 85 days. So I was quite, still am quite a good friend of Athel's. And so I used to go and support them and come to Scotland and play a bit. And it was really then at the point that I was approached I was approached by Nat Russell and Bob Shepherd in 2004 when I was there. Would I consider an Australia? And would I consider to think about applying to come onto the RSPBO judging panel? Because I had been on the judging panel in Australia for quite a number of years prior to that.
Yes.
And it was a time when they were opening it up a little bit in the RSPBA for international adjudicators. So I did that. I put the resume in and did the whole thing, and that we started that process in 2005. And of course, there was a lot of people on that course. There was people like Jimmy, what's the boy who bought Shots Reads, Troy, James Troy. There's quite a number of many.
There are quite a few international people then. Successful. When did you actually start judging abroad then? Apart from you've been judging in Australia. When's the first time that you judged overseas?
Oh, well, see, I'd done Edamclaw in 2001. I went with Nat Russell in 2001 and judged there. That was an interesting, funny story, because it was before we got the RSPBA, but that was an interesting one. We got invited to go there, and we went there. And Edamclaw is only a small town of about 13,000 people, but it gets about 100,000 people at the competition for 2 or 3 days. So
whereabouts is that?
It's in near Seattle, right near the northwest of up there. And SFU happened to go there a lot. They were there that year. Anyhow, the quick story there was we got there 2 or 3 days, and the lady says, "Righto, Nat," it was a 2-day comment. "Nat, you're judging on the Friday. You're judging ensemble, and Sam, you're doing pipe." And I thought, well, that's good. That's what I've come for. So then she said, "And on Saturday, Sam, you're doing ensemble, and Nat, you're doing piping." And I'd never judged ensemble competition in my life. And Nat Russell gives me a big elbow and says, "Don't worry about it." And we went back, and he said, so he goes back to the hotel that night, and for 2 nights he puts me through the John McKell's ensemble course.
Oh.
and the funny part about it is that at the end of the competition, Terry Lee come to me and said, "Bye, thanks, Sam." He said, "That was a great ensemble sheet." So you can get away with some things sometimes, you know.
Did you ever do any further studies into ensemble? Just, I'm not joking here. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, so of course, then what we did is we introduced ensemble certificate training ensemble in Australia in around about 2008. 2008, and that was involved in a lot of that. I know Bob Worrell came and done some seminars, but they do things a little bit differently. And I had Malcolm McKenzie out for 4 days, and we did. Malcolm ran ensemble course here for 4 days with us. And that was amazing, because Malky was a good ensemble guy, and so we did that. So yeah, we did the ensemble certification here in Australia, but of course you have to redo that certification in Scotland if you RSPBA if you wanted to go on that one. But,
It's difficult, you know, and there's lots of views about all these sort of things, and I've espoused that in various interviews, but folk don't want to hear my views and all that sort of stuff. But it's interesting. It's interesting, though. It really is, and it's constantly evolving, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important, and I mean, I know with Bob Shepherd, for example, Bob was a great supporter. To be truthful, with getting us trained and encouragement, and the whole thing, but. Bob was very much of the view that, eventually we'll just have ensemble judges. Well, I don't know.
Well, that's my view, that you should be judging as a band. I'm not a big fan of this drumming prize sort of thing. If you're going to award prizes for drumming and bass drumming and tenor drumming, you might as well award the prize for the pipe corps as well, and then the whole thing breaks down and shatters in the floor. You should just a whole effect, an orchestra, just to be judged as a full unit, and I think it would bring it more cohesively together.
Sure.
But that's me started again, so I'll let you edit all that
out. No, I know what you're saying. No, it's one of those things you got to be, but you got an opinion, and that's important,
Yeah, and what's it? Your other hobbies? You've got, I see Scottish music, culture, and Highland dancing, and bagpipe design, and equestrian events. We would touch a few moments on each of these. So Scottish music and culture. What's your interest there?
Oh, look, I'm into all sorts of Scottish music. I mean, I love to go and listen to the Red Hot Chili Pipers and Battlefields and all these things. I think it's just and recordings of anything. My wife, of course, is involved in Highland dancing. I mean, she has judged cow from time to time and different things. And I still play the pipes for some of her displays occasionally when I do.
You're a brave man playing for Highland dancers.
But I won't go and do it for the competitions like Big Donald McPhee because you're there all day.
Yeah, absolutely. Aye. Yeah. I spoke to Donald at length about that, and he's been interviewed as well. Yes. Big long interview because Donald's done everything, of course, in the piping scene, including this Highland dancing thing, Yes, so your wife, did she win prizes at Highland dancing?
Yeah, she's competed in her early years in Scotland quite a bit, and but placings and different things, and cow, all that type of thing.
Yeah.
But they're much more organised than the Pipe Band Association, the Highland dancers.
And I, as a young piper, I was always scared stiff of the mothers when you played for the dancers,
Yeah, you got the right tempo.
No, I was always accused of watching another dancer instead of their daughter.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Right. Highland design, bagpipe design development. I touched on that with your father, his interest in one thing or another. And have you continued that interest then?
Yeah, I have, Alan. I've spent a lot of time and hours understanding a lot of the theory that he's gone into. What effects if you open up a throat, and what effects if you go into all sorts of very technical things like modal links and all that sort of thing with the wavelengths and different drones. And of course, it's quite relevant these days with the higher pitches. That's the interesting part. Now that we're running higher pitches, you can understand why some of the old drones are not as steady as they used to be, and you can actually prove it on what they call oscilloscope. But that's getting a bit technical. But it's quite an interesting topic, and little modifications here and there, and because there's a lot of myths too. There's a lot of myths, and the theory will prove the myths are there. So I'm really quite interested in the way in which that sort of evolves, and
What's your view on the pitch? Do you think that will come back down eventually? There's certain trends for a broader sound and getting down from the 482, 484 megahertz, because B is at 493 or 492. We're always playing a B chanter.
Correct. Yeah. I'm of the view that it can't go any higher.
No.
And if it does, I think you've lost the whole thing. And I know, particularly from the theory of it, that once you start to go over that 483 mark, you're certainly going to have issues, particularly in your high Gs.
Yes,
high Gs that's the flow note of the chanter in the design, and it just doesn't cope with anything much in a true balanced sense.
Yeah.
And you
And
can prove
even the
that. You
low
can actually
G's
prove.
can be destroyed as well.
They honk, yeah. Well, that I'm getting too technical now. You get this modal length between the low G and the high G, and so what they call a wavelength, and it clashes, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Aye.
Yeah, so it gets very theoretical, and it's a topic that's probably on most, but I just think that the pitch could come back a bit, and I think to support that, if you look at bands like the Field Marshal, they've actually dropped their pitch a couple of cycles from what they used to be, say,
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah. I think lots of, I don't want to put names on the people,
No,
but
no.
lots of pipe majors would love the pitch to come back down ever so slightly. But it's who's going to move first, and they're worried that the results will suffer if they are seen to be radically different from everybody else. That sort of thing, is who's going to jump first. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think the trick is it's not about pitch, it's about brightness. And it's about the brightness is about the reed. So I think what we have to think about is we pay $300 for the reed and $25 for the chanter.
It's amazing,
I mean,
I know.
that's really if you get the right reeds, it'd be amazing how much brightness and carrying power you can get out of a chanter if you get it right. It's not about the pitch.
Yeah. Did you ever make reeds yourself?
Bob Nicol showed me how to make reeds. He was a reed maker, and he showed me how to make reeds. And I actually came home and made the tools and made the staples and that. But I didn't have the patience for it because you only get about 1 in 20 reeds that really worked. I didn't have the patience.
It takes years to build up the expertise, and it's lots of time involved.
You got to have cane and all that,
Yeah.
But I learned a lot about reedsmanship up for him,
Listen, talking about cane, the source cane in Australia.
Yes, yeah. There's been a lot of cane. In fact, it was interesting. I sent Bob Shepherd some cane. Oh, this is probably 15 years ago now. I sent him some cane, which I had here from Australia, and he made quite successful reeds out of it. The problem is I couldn't get enough of it.
Where does it come from? Is it the north?
The cane I sourced actually came out of New South Wales here. But there's a reed maker called forget his name now in Melbourne. Not Gibson, forget now. But he makes reeds and he uses a cane out of South Australia. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. And I got a wee note about equestrian events. What was all that about?
Horses? I used to ride the horses and do the show jumping and all that business when I was a young fella.
Did you? Aye.
Yeah. I do a Billy Gillis, should I?
Yeah. When's the last time you were on a horse then?
10 years.
So you don't have any roaming about the back garden or anything?
No, not at the moment.
Hey, listen, we could talk here all day, Sam, and that's about a good hour anyway. And it's been very successful as far as I'm concerned. But this is the difficult question. What have we missed? What have we missed? What have we not covered?
I don't think you've missed too much, Alan, to be truthful.
It's just a conversation about your life and piping and that sort of thing. But when you coming back this year, Sam, for judging?
Back in August, yes. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Oh, well, look forward to seeing you then.
I got a daughter in Stornoway, Alan. So
have you?
She lives in Stornoway.
Aye. Oh well.
She teaches the drumming up there.
Does she?
Aye.
That's a shame. They teaches drumming, Nobody else in the family plays pipes apart from yourself, then,
I got all these great sets of bagpipes here, and then you have to, sell them, give them away.
Sam, thank you very much for your time, and I'm quite sure everybody, all the viewers, will love this episode. There's lots of wee quirky things and lots of history that folk have never heard of, and it's another piece in the giant jigsaw for Piper's Persuasion. And I thank you very much for your time. Thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me. Thank you.